Have you ever not slept for so long that you started hallucinating? What was your experience? Ex-addict. Was driving home after a 3-day meth bender. Needed food, so drove into a McDonald's drive-thru. When asked for my order, I replied McChicken meal, please. Then they asked me again, and I said McChicken meal, please. Then they asked me again, and I was like, can't you fucking hear me? McChicken meal. And that's when I realized I wasn't actually saying anything. I was just replying in my head. Fellow ex-addict here. A lot of times this has happened to me, where I thought I'd said something, but really all I'd done is think it. Fellow ex-addict here as well. I can definitely relate. Did you guys ever see shadow people? Where your mind believes someone is standing there but there's really no one. It would happen a lot to me when I'd pass parked cars or walk my dog on the trails. Edit. It seems a lot of people thought I meant the drugs cause the hallucinations. Figured. Explain myself. I went through opiate detox a few times, relapsed until it finally stuck, and the sleep deprivation from detoxing was what caused the hallucinations. Usually after 72 hours of no sleep was when I'd start to see shadow people. After a week with little to no sleep, I would see them constantly out of the corner of my eyes. I'm glad to see there are so many ex-addicts here. We are all stronger than society gives us credit for. You all are wonderful people. Fellow ex-addict here also can definitely relate. Used to think I'd say stuff out loud, but I only thought it. It was the weirdest thing. Also saw shadow people only a handful of times. My boyfriend and friends though saw shadow people all the time, which freaked me out more than seeing them myself, while also blacking out while being awake after being up for too many days. All of a sudden I'd come to and be on the other side of town when I meant to just go right home. That was the absolute worst. Or dozing off at a red light, wondering how I have made it out alive. Damn, am I happy to be sober. Edit. Holy shit, this kinda blew up. Didn't expect that. Thanks for the awards, kind strangers. Close bracket. I saw shadow people a few times. At 18 before I was diagnosed, the nights before I had night terrors, I would always see a 7 feet tall shadow man standing in front of my door. That happened for years while I had night terrors. When I got medicated for my illness, I started having to walk home from work late from the train. That's when I really saw shadow people. It's B1 AM. I see a dark figure standing still 50 yards in front of me. I look behind me. I see a shadow man same distance away. I look forward. The shadow man I first saw is gone. That happened at least 3 to 4 times a week until my medication switched. I used to abuse Adderall and would stay up 3 days straight working on bullshit projects that I never finished. Anyway, one time I was at the end of a 3-day bender where I had taken about 10 days worth of Adderall. As I laid down to sleep, I started hearing my mom arguing with my brother and his girlfriend. It went on for a long time, and I was like, surely they have to be at work and this shit will end soon. Eventually my brother's baby started to cry, and the adults were too busy arguing to calm her down. I said fuck that, and stormed out of the bedroom. Down the stairs, and the house was completely empty. 2 triple stacks, and 8 2 Adderalls with it. I worked almost an entire 24-hour shift at a Steak and Shake, was running MFN circles around everybody else. Worked second and third the same day, got off at 7 AM, went and smoked a couple blunts, then went back to work at like 11 AM until midnight. Then was up for 2 more days. Shit was wild. I been sober from everything. I don't even smoke cigarettes no more. I don't know WTF. I used to be thinking doing that shit to myself. Forgot to add how long I've been clean. Almost 2.5 years. Huh. This is weird. This has happened to me before. But not on drugs. Often, when I'm like half awake, I'd start thinking of things I have/want to do. Exactly how I wanna do it, and then for some reason I've convinced myself that I did those things. But then I come to and realize that I'm still laying down and haven't done anything yet. A buddy of mine landed a painting job working inside of a big commercial building, and he basically stayed in the place for 6 days straight smoking crystal meth and painting to meet his deadline and avoid hiring a crew to help him. On the 6th day the building caught fire and he ran into the lobby and was pulling people out into the streets and yelling to call 911. The fireman showed up and couldn't locate a fire because there was none. He was hallucinating. I feel like paint fumes also had something to do with it. Yeah, after 70 hours or so, it's pretty disorienting and rational thinking starts to get very slow. The hallucinations are not realistic, but are more like gaps in your vision that are shaped like things might see a silhouette at a distance or briefly around a corner. Very difficult to function in this state. Would not recommend. For me, the sleep afterwards isn't very quality either. I usually wake up feeling shitty still. It feels like I'm stressing in my sleep. That is a very good description. I was reading and trying to put to words my experience. Gaps in vision shaped like things. Yep. I also saw a lot of light shifting. Fucking shadow people. It's bad for you. You shouldn't do it. But if you're asking this question, you're the type to try. Remember, it's not real and relax. Go to sleep. For a while, when I was active duty, I got really paranoid about the shadow people for obvious reasons. You have no idea the relief I felt when I found out I wasn't the only one who saw them. I really thought I was losing it, but man, I was just exhausted. An ex of mine called me and asked if he could come sleep with me as he hadn't been able to sleep for days and was seeing things, and he felt safe around me. As we were still friends, I said yes. When he came over, he said that he had been trying to hook up with girls, but couldn't do it as their faces were turning into demons, and he was afraid he would hurt them. Needless to say, I didn't sleep myself that night, and the next day we took him to the doctor for meds for his insomnia. Didn't realize wet dreams could become wet hallucinations. As soon as I start seeing shadow people while driving, I know I need to pull over. The only problem was I started seeing them at 3 AM behind the wheel and was so scared of the hallucinations I didn't want to stop because I thought if they did they'd get me. But I did stop and sleep and they went away. WTF. When I was depressed, my doc prescribed me some meds to help me sleep better. The first time I ever took it, I was nervous, so my BF at the time was on the phone with me talking to me while I drift off to sleep. I don't remember any of this, but apparently I kept telling him there are shadow people circling around my bed looking at me. He just consoled me and told me it's fine, they are not going to do anything to me, and asked me to hug my plushes tight and go to sleep. Holy shit. Shadow people is creeping me out. Do we always see them when we need to go to sleep? When we used to do that shit, we would brag about how long we've been up and talk about the days like they were different chapters. Yeah man, I'm on day 3. Day 1 me and Cam went to pick up the sack and smoked the whole thing. Last week on day 4 I fell asleep in the lobby of the subway and yada yada. I don't miss that drug. Shadow people aren't bad. It was freaky when I first saw them. Now I just imagine they're people from an alternate reality minding their own business. It sets my mind at ease at least. When I was like 16, I was into drugs and didn't sleep for nearly a week. I was watching TV and tried to turn it up, but somehow put on the sleep timer, so it randomly shuts off a few minutes later, and there's 3 shadow people suddenly there. One behind the TV, one behind the recliner, and one a few feet in front of me. The one in front of me put its finger to its face, like it was shushing me. Then they all crept forward using weird, exaggerated steps. Obviously, I freaked out and started screaming and throwing shit at them. My boyfriend at the time woke up and turned on the light and they all disappeared. Needless to say, if they were people in an alternate reality, they clearly were not minding their own business. LMAO. But I no longer stay up for days on end or do drugs, so no more shadow people for me. Though, after like 10 months of my daughter waking up every 30 minutes minus 2 hours, I was starting to hallucinate. But she started sleeping through the night, mostly now. So all good in the neighborhood. I want background on these shadow people. Never heard of it. They start off as movements occurring just at the periphery of your vision. As the days go by, they appear to be people at the corner of your eye, but you can never seem to catch them. I would say day 4 to 5 or greater, and you're going to be hallucinating and in pretty bad shape physically. Edit. 7 to 10 days without sleep won't kill you. I went roughly 4 days on 5 hours sleep total. I could function fine, but I would just constantly hear things like people mumbling right next to me. Okay, story time. My mom suffers from narcolepsy, and one of the first treatments they gave her basically drove her also completely insane. She was up for 5 days. One day I walked into her bedroom hearing her talking to someone. I look around and ask her who she is talking to, and she tells me the lady in red. There is no one in the room at all, just us. I ask where is the lady, and she says the lady sits on the dresser and talks to her all night. I was like 14 at the time, so I went to the kitchen and hid her medicine until my stepdad got home and could take her to the hospital. The doctor was super upset about the meds her doctor had given her. It was way too much. Anyway, she stopped seeing the lady after they got all that straightened out. Edit. Alright, I'm going to say it. Wow, this blew up. Thank you all for your thoughtful and kind wishes for my mom. She does have good days and bad days. Her narcolepsy is caused by a small tumor on her brain. She gets better when it shrinks, and worse when it grows. It gets to about the size of a dime sometimes. They can't remove it, but are trying to keep it shrunk with medicine. That is scary. I check her meds now every time before she takes them. Her doctors have given her meds that don't mix well 2 times now. I stayed up for 3 days straight when I was 17. On the 3rd day, I kept hearing people call my name as if they wanted to ask me a question. It didn't help that I also thought it would be a good idea to go to school that day. Multiple times a day, I would bolt upright and look around to see who wanted to my attention, only to see my fellow students huddled over their work. It got worse as the day went. My friends were a little worried about how weird I was acting. I walked home after school, listening to my headphones as usual, but I still kept hearing someone call my name. The music made it worse. Whatever I was hearing was already kind of muffled, and having a song playing in my ears only seemed to obscure it more. When I finally got home, I told my mom I wasn't feeling well, went to my room, and went straight to sleep at 4 in the afternoon. As nodded off, I heard that voice calling for me again, making me jerk out of my sleep. This repeated a couple times until I convinced myself that I already told my mom I was sick, and if she really needed me, she could come get me. I finally went to sleep and didn't wake until 2 AM to use the bathroom, and then went to sleep afterwards again until 9 AM the next day. I was an idiot. This is very similar to my experience at about the same age. Same amount of time awake. I've always had sleep issues, but I'll never do that again. I hadn't slept for about 72 hours when I went to the doc gave me Ambien. I go home, get in bed and take one. A few minutes later, the floor was covered in water and the walls were melting. It was raining outside, and the water on my windows was marching in formation. I've never known whether that was sleep deprivation or the effects of Ambien. I've never taken another. I was prescribed Ambien once. I took it, and I could still wake up on it, but I started seeing the shadows in the corner of my room curling up and almost moving. It was freaky. I don't take Ambien anymore. Overseas on a deployment. Started getting sleep deprived for a period of time. Started hallucinating the big date/palm trees moving across the road like in the Lord of the Rings when the trees walk. This always makes me question some of the weird shit I saw. Was it real, or was I just really fucking tired from op-tempo? I suffered from horrific insomnia about 12 years ago. I was on Lexapro, and one of the side effects is insomnia. At the time, that wasn't well documented. So I tried everything from Ambien to alcohol, so I could sleep. I would usually get about a 3-hour nap at most, before being awake again. I would go 3 to 5 days without sleeping. Eventually, I hit the point of desperation and start recreational substances to try and knock myself out. There were several occasions of hallucinations, but the one that sticks out is truly terrible. I was on day 6 without sleeping at least 5 hours. I was laying in bed and a friend came in to start talking with me. We had many great conversations since our friendship began, but hadn't talked in a while at that point. I told him how bad I was struggling and that honestly, killing myself would have been easier. He said he felt the same way many times, but that it was a terrible idea, and I knew how badly it had messed up his family. When I looked at him, he was a bloody mess on the side of his face. Jaw ripped apart, teeth missing, but talking to me like nothing was wrong. He had been dead for a few years at that point. Suicide. shot himself in his garage after years of substance abuse. And I just had a 3-hour conversation with a hallucination of a dead friend. I ended up switching meds to Celexa and my sleep issues disappeared within a month. So, if you are having sleeping issues, please, go see a document. It's a dark place that damn near took me. I was on Lexapro, and one of the side effects is insomnia. Wait, really? No one told me that. I'm on Lexapro now and sometimes I have trouble getting to sleep at night. I really don't mind though, because I used to be on a really high dose of Zyprexa, and that knocked me out cold, and it was so bad that when I woke up in the morning I was still completely exhausted and had to drink an entire pot of coffee just to be able to wake up and start working. And to make matters worse, I was knocked out, so cold that I couldn't even dream at all. So I absolutely hated sleep, wouldn't you? If you passed out completely exhausted and woke up instantaneously, but it's actually 8 hours later and you're still completely exhausted. What a waste of time. And now my psychiatrist wants to increase my Lexapro, but at the same time she also wants to put me on a small dose of Zyprexa to help me sleep. I wonder what will happen. But for now I generally get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Though sometimes I might only get 4. But I still feel at least somewhat rested in the morning. And on rare occasions I'll just sleep all day. Yes, I saw shadow creatures, and I thought they were out to get me. Me too. I had been sleep deprived for weeks, 3 hours a night most nights, and hadn't slept the night before. I was out a walk with friends and we stopped for a bit, and then I started seeing the shadows move. Then they looked like a pile of bodies, and then I was convinced that they'd come drag me into the pit. Get some sleep, this experiment isn't worth it. During exam week I pulled 3 all-nighters in the library between tests. The library was open 24 hours, so I'd just stay up all night making note cards then go take an exam. During the day, I lived off campus and didn't want to spend the gas money. I'd go to the most isolated area, but the library would pretty much be cleared out by midnight. I started to see glimpses of people, and I thought it was a bunch of students fucking with me, but there was no one on that floor. I thought the lights went off at some point and maybe it was a sensor, so I started jumping around to reactivate it, but obviously, it was like the whole time. You stayed up for 3 days to save on gas money? Why didn't you just nap in the library or your car? Once in my early 20s I took acid and didn't sleep at all for like 3 days. At one point on the 3rd day a door told me to go fuck myself, and I really wasn't sure if it was from the drugs building up over time or because I was so tired. I guess there's some confusion over the wording, but this was not one dose. This was multiple red doses over the course of 3 days with diminishing returns. It's almost a regular occurrence for me by now because I suffer from insomnia. There are 3 different types of hallucinations for me. 1. Funny useless shit I know is fake. 2. Shit that could be real or not. 3. Extremely scary and traumatic shit I know is fake, but rattles me up every single time. Usually, they appear in that order. Pro tip, if you are experiencing visual hallucinations and you aren't sure whether something is real or not, take a photo with your smartphone and look at that. It is very unlikely that you hallucinate the same shit twice and in the exact same position. Works for me, at last. Edit, holy son of a biscuit eater. This just about blew up in a matter of hours. I received a handful of genuinely interested people's questions and I'll try to answer all of them. Should I receive even more? To most of them, I already replied. We'll continue later. Because, as I'm typing this, I'm awake at an hour I should not be awake. So I'll try and get some more shooty. Imagine the irony. Spent a few weeks only getting about 4 hours of sleep a night. My brain started seeing, from the corners of my eyes, black things dropping from the ceiling that looked like giant spiders. I started making sure I got enough sleep. I didn't have visual hallucinations but auditory. It was like music and very nice, but scary because you didn't know where it came from. Was it never gonna give you up? No sleep for 4 days straight. It really fucks with your head. All sounds heightened to the maximum, and was sure I could hear all my neighbors talking shit about me. Guy I knew didn't sleep for a week because apparently meth does that to a human. Anyway, he quit when he stopped to let a dragon cross the street. I was a passenger in a car, and looking out the window the shadows from trees would morph and grow and move. It was kinda scary, but I enjoyed it. It was like drugs, before I did drugs. Don't do drugs. Do sleep. After 30 hours I started seeing insects on the walls, and on my desk. That weren't there. Might have just been the light. Or paranoia because I'm massively afraid of spiders. Made it to 50 hours without really seeing anything else though. In college there we had a major group project. We all stayed on campus for 48 hours and no sleep. Let's just say that by the end we were all hallucinating while writing our code. At one point I remember thinking my code was talking, but the music had just started playing. So in training to join the British Army Infantry everyone does a defense exercise. Basically you deploy onto the area then spend 72 straight hours digging trenches. No sleep, no rest. It's a double whammy between sleep deprivation and exhaustion. Although I never hallucinated, I did pass out onto some bloke though. I did see a few blokes experience crazy stuff. One bloke walked into a foggy field and was missing for hours. Once he realized he was lost he laid on the floor, flipping between the channels on his radio saying hello and hoping someone would hear him. Another bloke who was a Welsh speaker lost the ability to distinguish between the two languages. He'd speak to you in Welsh, then get annoyed when you didn't understand him, believing he was speaking perfect English. I was going through a lot with an abusive ex. He'd keep me up for ages, and when I could finally sleep I would have nightmares. So I started hallucinating spiders in my ceiling, and it felt like hands were touching me. It lasted for days. Since the hallucinations messed up the little sleep I got diagnosed with a beginning psychosis and schizotypal disorder mostly because I didn't dare tell them about my ex, so they couldn't set a PTSD diagnosis for me. They started giving me drugs to help the psychosis. But since it was because of my ex and lack of sleep it didn't really help, and I had to deal with just being drugged as well. I once worked a 17-hour shift. I was working an event for a cocktail company. Work started early in the morning, and I drove about 30 minutes to their company premises. The event was a private wedding in a field, and we were a pop-up cocktail bar. After loading all the fresh fruit onto the van, I was driven about an hour away to the venue, where we unloaded the van. We had to physically set up a metal bar, stock it up, prep ingredients, decorate it and get all the glassware ready. People started ordering drinks at 3 PM, and it went on late into the night. Although we had breaks, we were on our feet all night. The person in charge of our van had forgotten to pack a light, so we loaded the van back up in the dark. Almost ran over one of the guests who had passed out in the middle of the field and I cut myself pretty badly. We got back to the barn storage at about 4 AM, and I had to drive home. I was so worn out I was seeing cows everywhere. I kept having to stop for cows in the road. Cows in the bushes on the side of the road, but none of it was real. When I eventually got to lighter roads I stopped seeing shit that wasn't there and I'll never put myself through something so dangerous again. I had really bad sleep problems for years. At one point I went to a party having been awake for 36 hours when arriving. I didn't really hallucinate also, because I couldn't sleep. But when I finally did, I got the sleep I needed. The problem was mostly falling asleep. For me stress and lack of sleep triggers some form of sleep paralysis and these weird dreams, where I'm lying down somewhere, and I can't see properly, and I can't get up because everything is just so blurry and spinning around. It made me wake up in cold sweats and I remember once waking up and falling back asleep so many times because I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open that I called my mom crying because I did not know whether I was awake or not. I'm better now. OHH, I have a great cautionary tale for this. Me, 19, freshly sent to Japan for the use of a little pretext here. Japan is famous for the car culture there, and it inspires hundreds of thousands of people. One particular multi-track circuit that is incredibly famous is called Ebisu Circuit and it has a festival a few times a year called Drift Match Series. This particular event draws drivers and spectators from around the world to thrash their cars for 72 hours straight for one cheap price. Influencers fly in and buy a car for the week a lot. And it's as important I can't remember what caused me to stay up all night. I might have been gaming, or I might have been studying. But it was match theory weekend at Ebisu and Adam LZ, famous drift YouTuber, was gonna be there with Temere. With Elisha being just around 150 kilometers away, I started my car and set out on my journey. I had never used the tolls before, so I ended up driving 7 hours instead of the originally predicted 3. I was also freshly imported into Japan and had yet to take my car on a true drive-through the Japanese country, so I trucked on through single lane roads through rice paddies and small mountain villages. Honestly not the kind of place my drift car was suited for, but it was dope. I ended up getting to the circuit at like 3:30, met the crew, and hung out for a while. Practiced on the skid pad, but I had to get back to base before 12. I stayed for an hour, and turned around and went home. I had been awake for close to 64 hours at that point. I really didn't have any issues until about 10:30. Back in the thick concrete jungle of Tokyo, I had a few hallucinations, but the worst was where I drove my car into a hole in the middle of the road. I was out for at least a few seconds, probably sleeping. Unfortunate that the roads were next to empty around me. But I could have died that night and everyone around me was in danger. Do yourself and everyone around you a favor. Don't drive tired. Visions. People existing where they shouldn't be. Like walking across rafters and ducks high above factory floors. Memory loss. Irritability like you've never been through before. Pain. You lose time. An hour here, an hour there. Your cognitive abilities decline. I've gone week-long stretches where I probably averaged between 10 to 15 hours sleep over a 7-day period so many times that it became normal. It wasn't that the stretches themselves were long, maybe 20 hours at most, but there was no deep sleep in the downtime. Without deep sleep you start to go mad, and I've been pretty close to going over the edge. Stayed up for 2.5 days. Saw a straight up guy walk through my apartment. Nobody was there. The day after I brought my son home from the hospital, the striped curtains in my room were billowing in the breeze. Except there was no breeze. The stripes were just shimmying and swaying. I'd had 8, maybe 9 hours total in 4 days, and was running on pure adrenaline and narcotics. C-section. I don't recommend it.